The Wyoming Supreme Court just handed reproductive rights advocates a rare victory. In a 4-1 decision, the court ruled that the state's 2 abortion bans are unconstitutional. One law prohibited all providers from performing abortions. The other made it illegal to prescribe, dispense, distribute, sell, or use any abortion medication, which is the first law of its kind in the nation. Both laws were passed in 2023 and have been tied up in legal battles ever since. In the majority opinion, Wyoming's Chief Justice wrote, quote, "The Wyoming Constitution guarantees each competent adult the right to make his or her own health care decisions, and it directs the state of Wyoming, of which the judicial branch is a part, to preserve these rights from undue governmental infringement, and that Wyoming laws restricting abortion access unreasonably and unnecessarily infringe on this right," end quote. In other words, banning abortion violates a woman's right to make decisions about her own health care. That might sound obvious to many of you, but it's a notable ruling in a Republican-controlled state that voted Republican in the past 15 presidential elections, and at a time when most Republican-led states continue to enforce strict abortion bans despite legal challenges. Among the plaintiffs who brought this case was Wellspring Health Access, a clinic in Casper, Wyoming, that's headed by someone with vast experience in fighting for abortion rights in some of the most underserved parts of the country. Julie Burkhart is the president of Wellspring Health Access, but in the early 2000s, she worked for Dr. George Tiller, one of the most targeted abortion providers in the country at the time. When Tiller was assassinated in 2009 by anti-abortion extremists, Burkhart founded the Trust Women Foundation in order to honor his legacy and to continue fighting for reproductive rights. Her foundation has helped advocate for reproductive rights across the nation, and in 2013, Burkhart reopened Dr. Tiller's clinic in Wichita, Kansas. She also went on to open clinics in her home state of Oklahoma and now in Wyoming. Today, Wellspring is Wyoming's only full-service abortion clinic. Other providers closed amid the state's hostile legal climate following the Dobbs decision. And even now, with Wyoming's abortion ban struck down, access to abortion remains limited, and Republicans continue to pass other restrictions. In fact, last year, the state enacted a law requiring an ultrasound 48 hours before a patient can receive an abortion medication, regardless of whether that procedure is medically indicated. The state also passed a separate law requiring abortion clinics to be licensed as ambulatory surgical centers, which is a common tactic by anti-abortion lawmakers known as a TRAP law. TRAP stands for Targeted Regulation of Abortion Clinics, where clinics are hit with costly and unnecessary rules designed to shut them down. That law did, in fact, force Wellspring to temporarily stop providing abortions, but both of those laws are also now temporarily blocked as they face legal challenges that are still working their way through the courts. Julie Burkhart joins me now. Burkhart is, of course, the president of Wellspring Health Access. She's the founder and former CEO of Trust Women, a reproductive justice organization that operates clinics providing abortion, gender-affirming care, and other sexual health services. Julie, it's great to see you again. Thank you for being with us.
No, Allie, it's so nice to be back and to be able to talk about this moment.
Yeah, and I think it's important because you have been in this so long that you've seen literally all the ups and downs, including the worst of the downs. And you don't get caught up in the wave of whether this is a down or not. You and people like you across this country keep going with legal challenges and providing abortion services. And this is a real victory.
Yes, we were incredibly delighted to get this ruling. I was a little nervous before I opened the link to the opinion because I didn't know what it was going to tell us. But once I began reading through it, it became very clear that we had prevailed in the state Supreme Court and were able to provide abortion services in Wyoming.
There are other books on the laws on the books, as I just mentioned. They're on hold at the moment, but they're all going to work their way through the system. Does this decision have an impact on how those get litigated?
Well, we hope so, and that will be part of our arguments going in to a hearing that we have in March, so coming up in a couple months. And so we hope that this opinion is something that the judge in the case in the county district court will consider carefully. So, we'll see what happens in March, when we go before the judge.
Because sometimes these opinions tend to be really, really narrow, not necessarily applicable to other things. But the Chief Justice here it wasn't narrow. It was about infringing upon a woman's right to make decisions about her own body.
Correct. Yes. The opinion affirmed that people in the state of Wyoming have the right to make decisions about their own health care, which includes abortion. So they affirm that abortion is health care and that people have a right to make their decisions about health care without government interference. And they also went on to say in the opinion that if there is a reason to restrict abortion access, then it has to be a very, very, very good reason. And so, we have that language in this opinion that we can fall back on. And, we hope that the legislature will not attempt to meddle much in terms of introducing new anti-choice bills, but we shall see. We know this fight's not over, but we are just so delighted that reasonable people in Wyoming were able to see that abortion is health care. Excuse me.
Wyoming's governor, Mark Gordon, is actually calling on the legislature to meddle much. He's calling on state lawmakers to pass a constitutional amendment to override the court's decision and to ban abortion. He issued a statement in which he said it's time for this issue to go before the people for a vote, and I believe it should go before them this fall. A constitutional amendment taken to the people of Wyoming would trump any and all judicial decisions. I call on the legislature to pass and place a clear constitutional amendment on my desk during the upcoming budget session. What's your take on that? Because this actually, even in conservative states, there are a lot of people who have said they don't really want to give the state certain rights.
Correct. And I think we've seen in a couple of cases back in the 90s and also the 2010s that voters spoke overwhelmingly that they did not want to have their rights infringed upon. One was a personhood amendment that hit the ballot in the mid-90s, overwhelmingly by about 60 some odd percent. It was resoundingly defeated. And then with the passage of this 2012 amendment, on which we based our it was part of our case on which we based it, that voters rejected government interference into their health care. Once again, that passed by 60 some odd percent. I would also like to point out that, yes, we have a clinic in a state that is resoundingly red, Republican registration, but party identification does not necessarily dictate how you feel about abortion and abortion access. This is not a partisan issue. This is a partisan issue only because of politicians who have made it into this wedge issue for political benefit.
Yep.
Yes.
And you've watched this through your entire career because you were there at a point where you saw, well, hey, somebody decided this was going to be the wedge issue. Julie, thanks again for all you do and for being with us this morning. Julie Burkhart is the president of Wellspring Health Access and the founder and former CEO of Trust Women.